I think I'm just going to move this down a little bit. Let me get started. I am Barbara Davis. I work as the Community Relations Coordinator here. I'm here tonight at the New Rochelle Public Library, and I'm also the City Historian for New Rochelle. This is a program about New Rochelle and the impact of the many groups of immigrants and migrants that came to our community. It's not specifically to New Rochelle. I think most communities in America share this story in some way or another, but I'm going to introduce you to New Rochelle and the people that built it, made it what it is today. I do have to go back and start with the very earliest documented inhabitants of the area, and these were often referred to as Siwanoy Indians, though we're not sure that that's indeed who inhabited the area. We do know it was of the Lenape people and the Algonquian nation that encamped along the shores of Long Island Sound for its abundance of shellfish and the area's abundance of game. That would soon not be the case when a group of French refugees bought 6,000 acres of land from Lord John Pell. What's New Rochelle today is that exact 6,000 acres of land plus 100 acres more that Lord Pell and his wife gave for a church. These French Protestants were called Huguenots. They fled their homeland because of persecution. The image you see is an illustration of the very earliest community with the church right in the middle. These French refugees quickly started establishing roots here. This is from a WPA, actually a New Deal mural at our post office, and there's a lot of historical inaccuracies, but I won't digress. It is very good to have this reminder of our settlement because it was unique. We were the only community in the colonies that was totally French well into the 1700s. The records from 1698 give account of 231 inhabitants. 43 are listed as Negroes. They were slaves. When the Huguenots left the last stronghold of France, which was the port of La Rochelle, the port was also a port of slave trading. And many escaped on slave ships. A large group went to the West Indies and they purchased slaves to bring with them to their new home in what's now Manhattan. They made their way up to this area to purchase this 6,000 acres. And one of the things that's inaccurate about that mural I just showed you is they don't show people of color setting the foundation. But of course, we know that the slaves were probably doing a good amount of the heavy lifting. We have a tribute to the original Huguenot settlers down overlooking Long Island Sound in Hudson Park. They list all the names of those who first settled here. Here in the library, I get inquiries all of the time from descendants of these early French settlers. The land was transacted by this gentleman, Jacob Leisler, who's immortalized in a statue at the bottom of Broadview. And we have the original document. It was signed by Lord John Pell and his wife for the 6,000 acres to this small group of Huguenots. They are also depicted in another mural in the post office because we have this very funny tradition. It's quirky to us now, it wasn't then, where on June 24th, when demanded, the descendants of the Huguenots would have to give to the descendants of the Pell family one fat calf. This ceremony is resurrected periodically. I myself have been responsible for obtaining calves 3 times. Not easy. They're not very cooperative. They laid out the land. This is the 6,000 acres. The south here is the waterfront. Up here is Mamaroneck and Scarsdale. They drew one line straight down. That was the middle road. This is the Boston Post Road. These immigrants chose their land wisely because it was very fertile. It was on the Boston Post Road, the major thoroughfare between Boston and New York, and it had a great deal of waterfront access. By 1710, there were 49 families, primarily French, but there were also 3 Dutch who were probably Jewish. The first Jewish family in Westchester County, the Hayes family, whose descendants are the Sulzberger family of New York Times, 2 English and 2 German. This would be the case all around Westchester County, the smattering of Dutch, English, and German in those early years. The pastor for the church, which was the original Trinity Church, still doing worship service every Sunday, just across from the library. Reverend Stope also taught school there, and he kept a very extensive diary. He said there were about 400 persons in town, including these 2 Quaker families, 3 Dutch, 4 Lutherans, and 78 slaves. They maintain their French culture. This is a typical Huguenot home with a steeply pitched roof and a chimney on either side, and of stone, not logs. Another one, and we have a few examples of these today. They've been built on over the years, and each edition reflects a different era, which is wonderful. This 1697 house, the Rodman Lispenard Davenport house, was constructed it is a small little house and then gradually added on to, as was the Parcourt Drake house, the Pintard Manse, all still standing. And these farmhouses, the Clark Berrien house, representing a true farmhouse homestead, and the Leonard Secord house, and the Israel Secord house, which interestingly served as headquarters for General Howe as he organized his British troops to march up the middle road, then became called the Road to White Plains, into White Plains for the divisive battle of October 1776. We have a very poignant reminder of that period of time because we have the cemetery that started when martial law was in effect, and Mr. Coutant couldn't bury his mother in the burial grounds in the central part of New Rochelle, so carved out a piece of his property, and it still is maintained by the Coutant family today. By 1790, excuse me, we have 312 white males, 209 white females, and 88 slaves. These Huguenots were good farmers. The land was fertile, as I mentioned. They grew lots of crops, which would be turned into products by tidal mills, using the tide of Long Island Sound to fuel the paddle wheel, and the crops would be shipped out along docks that dotted the shoreline. The train came in the middle 1800s and would forever change New Rochelle. This was the first train station. It would be replaced by another within a few years. This one, in fact, which still stands today. The first passenger train came in 1848, and New Rochelle would soon become one of the premier American suburbs, of course, along with Yonkers. And also in the mid-1800s, there was a big change in New Rochelle because of the advent of the steamboat. It became a resort community, and all along there were picnic grounds that would offer people in Manhattan excursion on a steamboat up the East River to Long Island Sound, and a wonderful day's activities. That led to the establishment of some fabulous resorts, including the Neptune Hotel. And in point of salubrity, unsurpassed by any. You see the steamboat here. Today, there's the Fort Slocum Dock is located here, and you can still see the pilings where those steamboats pulled in. By 1881, a series of islands had been bought up by John Starren, and he was the owner of the largest fleet of steamships. He created destinations, including this world's pleasure grounds, John Starren's Glen Island Resort. It was an amazing place that saw up to 500,000 people within the first 3 years and every summer thereafter. He had all these exotic villages and an apiary, a zoo. There's actually an elephant buried out there. There were donkey rides. There was a beach. There was a casino that could feed 2,000 people at one time. All kinds of amenities, very sophisticated, quaint little villages meant to appeal to the genteel crowd as opposed to those who preferred the fun of Coney Island. It was quite a remarkable place, and it would last for many years. One of the remnants of these pleasure grounds is the Starnberg Castle. It still is at Glen Island Park today. The County Parks Commission purchased those islands after there was a very serious maritime accident, and the steam travel for pleasure waned significantly. This was John Starren's Little Germany. He also had a Little Holland. He had a Filipino village. He imported an entire Sioux tribe in 1903. We think that Disney probably got his idea for Epcot from Starren's Glen Island. But this is a significant part of the story because we had this Little Germany here, and the waiters in Little Germany were people from the west end of New Rochelle wearing lederhosen and serving New Rochelle lager beer. By the time that Glen Island opened, there was a substantial German community over in West New Rochelle, and one of the largest breweries in New York State. Here's a picture of the brewmeisters at the New Rochelle Brewery that was located on Webster Avenue. The Germans came in numbers in the mid-1800s because of economic and political strife, and that would be the case for all groups to follow. But they were the next, after the French, significant number of people to come, and they carved out their own area in West New Rochelle, an enclave that was a very, very organized neighborhood with First Avenue, Second Avenue, Third Avenue, First Street, Second Street, Third Street, and then this enormous brewery, a brewery park, brewery hotel. Many streets were German named, and it was a sub-community. These Germans.
I'm sorry, someone had a question. What is the name of that castle that you showed before?
Well, this is, he called it Starnberg Castle, but it was part of Little Germany at Glen Island Resort. There are remains of the castle at Glen Island still today that you can see this castle. It's one of the few remains, and you can see this funky looking rock here. That's still there today as well. And he had these small islands all connected by footbridges and chain ferries, but when the Park Commission bought it, it got all filled in. I have a presentation just on Glen Island. It was such an amazing, amazing place. And then, of course, it would become the home of the big band sound in the 1930s when Glen Island Casino had all of the great big band bands. So back to the Germans, there was such a big influx that there would be also an influx of great craftsmen. So if you weren't working in the brewery, you were busy building mansions. This was the start, this late 1800s was the start of the Gilded Age for New Rochelle, and it was gilded. People would come out and spend summer vacations out here, traveling by steamboat. They liked it so much that they planted roots here. And many of these were very wealthy individuals, like Simeon Leland, who had this built as his summer home. He was a wealthy hotelier in Manhattan and wanted a place he could entertain his guests out in the country. It had gorgeous sound views. It would later become the administrative offices for the College of New Rochelle. It still stands today, though the college is gone. So here's the picture of West New Rochelle. Just to give you a little orientation, this is the train coming through with 2 tracks going either way. And this is the downtown part of New Rochelle today. And here is the west end of New Rochelle, Webster Avenue, and then all the streets very carefully laid out. All these little boxes, this is a fire insurance map, indicate a structure. The pink would be brick, the yellow would be wood frame. And so this is the area that the Germans first settled in, and it would become the home of new immigrants following. The German influence also took hold in downtown. The Germans brought with them their beer, their delis, their ice making businesses. This was Germania Hall in downtown. Here we have Hofmeister's Market. He even imported the Bavarian look of the buildings, and that we see all of the time. And that is why our diversity is so rich, because the traditions, the cultures, the architecture came with people from their homeland. Here's ice making business that took place in front of the high school. And Rose Hill Nurseries, one of the largest nurseries in the country, was started by Henry Siebrecht. So these craftsmen were building these fabulous mansions, like this one for Colonel Richard Lathers, Sans Souci, which was designed by Alexander Jackson Davis, who also designed Lyndhurst and many other prominent buildings. He also designed this Gothic cottage, Wildcliff, which suffered a severe fire just a few years ago, but has been stabilized as a ruin and will have a future. And others along Davenport Neck, which offered great views, the panoramic views, the open air, and rich soil. This happens to be not in New Rochelle, but at the tip of Premium Point, and this is Echo Bay in New Rochelle, and this was one of the many Iselin homes. This one was built in the 1860s by John Stevenson, who was the inventor of the streetcar. And he used to come to New Rochelle with his family, enjoyed it so much, built this mansion for himself without using one nail. It's entirely screws. It's now the headquarters of the Eastern Provincial Don Bosco Salesian. And their school is right. It's because New Rochelle was the first stop on the New Haven Rail for many, many years before Mount Vernon was developed. So by 1865, 30% of the town's population was foreign born, because they would get off the ships at Ellis Island, go through processing, get to Grand Central, and if they had relatives or friends, New Rochelle was just one stop away. So by this time, we had 4,000 residents. 800 by now were Irish, and the Germans are slowly assimilating. 200 are listed in the census. And the Irish, when they first came, as was the case in communities across the country, were much discriminated against. There was a line painted down Center Avenue that said, "Irish cannot pass." They were sequestered to the southeast part of town, but many of them formed the first volunteer fire department and quickly became immersed in the New Rochelle community, so much that when New Rochelle became incorporated as a city, the first mayor was an Irish American. Here's a great shot of the Union Engine Company, which was primarily Irishmen. And their second church, the first having been St. Matthew's, which suffered a devastating fire, was Blessed Sacrament, built on Center Avenue by immigrants. So Trinity School was New Rochelle's first school, and began in 1855, first primary school that replaced the little one-room schoolhouses around town. Here's some school marms that taught there, as well as Isaac E. Young, the first superintendent of schools. And by 1880s, New Rochelle had become one of the first communities to embrace the concept of residential parks, following the pattern of Tuxedo Park and Llewellyn Park. They had a syndicate develop a park-like setting for a neighborhood within walking distance to a train station. The first, which we think is the third residential park planned in New York, was Rochelle Park. And it's a historic district now, located just behind City Hall. And the concept was not only park-like, but there was a setback from the street, there was a common area, lots of beautiful trees, landscaping. These common areas would often be greens that were beautifully landscaped with gardens. This took off. It was a really popular concept, and would continue to be a very appealing concept before World War I, then after World War I, up to the Depression. Here's the sign for the local designation. It's also listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So here's Residence Park, which followed. The streets often were windy to give aesthetic appeal. See the newly planted trees, those great wraparound porches. You, of course, have Park Hill and Yonkers, and Lawrence Park, so many other parks that followed the same formula. The common area, the stone pillars, we still have them all around town today, and they still mark neighborhoods with maintaining their integrity. In large part, only one is protected, but we're hoping that the others will keep up that same historic preservation minded effort. So between 1900 and 1930, New Rochelle's population quadrupled from 10,000 to 40,000, actually 50,000. The real estate offices were going constantly with sales of property. And it wasn't only to the wealthy and middle class, it was also to the working class. Everyone was attracted to New Rochelle's waterfront, its many recreational opportunities, such as the rowing club, the New Rochelle Yacht Club, the Huguenot Yacht Club, Echo Bay Yacht Club, many different opportunities, as well as the beautiful views and fishing and clean air. Here's Hudson Park Beach. This was started off as a picnic grove, lovely promenades along the water. Of course, it's not the same as the Hudson, but it has the more sweeping views because you can just glimpse the other side of the Sound and the Long Island shoreline. More schools were built, and they were built by immigrants, primarily the Italians, who started coming just after the town of New Rochelle and the village of New Rochelle incorporated to become the city of New Rochelle. And that was in 1899. Here's City Hall when it was located on Main Street. And Main Street was thriving. Here's a view from the other side of City Hall with its big Liberty pole. And it was bustling. It was a very early downtown because the Huguenots had first built their homes around their church, and that 100 acres of land that the Pells donated had been used to build a church and was located right in the downtown. So the New Rochelle community started at the Main Street downtown area and expanded up northward over the decades. But these buildings were built by the Germans, the Italians, the Irish, who had come to New Rochelle in the late 1800s. And for the most part, the shopkeepers by 1900 were Jewish. They were immigrants from Eastern Europe, escaping the persecution of Jews, and started off many as peddlers. When they got enough money, they would buy stores, and many lived over the stores so that they could keep their stores operating 7 days a week, such as I.B. Cohen, which is still here today, the Palace Shoe Store, owned by a Jewish fellow, Sam Wolf's Glazing, which is window glazing. There were so many shops, and the community grew that by 1904, the first synagogue was constructed, and that was Anshe Sholem. It would soon splinter off to include Temple Israel and the Hebrew Institute, which would become Bethel. These institutions would, with the exception of Anshe Sholem, would gradually move northward up into the northern part of New Rochelle by after World War II. But Anshe Sholem stayed in downtown and is still in downtown today. So this accounted for, again, the thriving community, the downtown area. It had many, many fashionable shops, and the money and the craftsmanship to build wonderful buildings to house them in. I'm back to the west of New Rochelle because as the Germans moved out, particularly by World War I, the Italians had moved in. And many of these immigrants came from Calabria area, such as the Cassara family. But then again, a number came from North Italy. This was the North Italy League of North Italy. They built this building in the north end of New Rochelle. We have 3 books written by people who grew up in West New Rochelle in various periods of time because there was such affection for this area. It was close-knit. The houses, the buildings were close together. The shops were right there. A real little hub of activity with backyard gardens and grapevines abounding. It's still today the same way, but with another group having moved in, which we'll come to later. Here's some just shops of a typical Italian deli, the Bellantoni grocery deli. And a lot of these Italian newcomers got work building the New York, Westchester, Boston Railway. It was a unique railway. It was built with a whole lot of money, no expense spared to make a smooth ride, beautiful depots. But the New York, Westchester, Boston Rail never went to Boston, and it only went as far into New York as the intersection of the Harlem River and Long Island Sound. But when it was in effect, it made a huge impact. It was running from 1913 to 1938. And as you'll see from these pictures, the construction was enormous. They did an incredible groundwork so that there would be a smooth ride, like building this trellis bridge. A work train would go over. They dumped soil to come up to the rail to keep it flat. And we have many remnants of this rail line, like this is now a shopping area in Waikagill. We have actually 3 extant stations in New Rochelle. Here are the lines going through Waikagill up towards White Plains. And they resulted in the development of many neighborhoods, like the Waikagill neighborhood that sort of really truly center New Rochelle, but further north than the high school, and Glenwood Lakes, which is near the Remington station. And then in far reaches of, there was the Quaker Ridge station, which is a private home today. Now, when these Italian newcomers were not building rail, they were finding loads of work doing construction, building the many homes that had to be built, the schools that had to be built, and in downtown, the first Westchester skyscraper, which we refer to as the K building. It's totally dwarfed now by the Trump Tower and the two originally called Avalon buildings. This is a picture from the around 1929, 1930. It was completed during the Depression, which is amazing. They also built monumental buildings such as banks that were neoclassical revival style buildings, and a host of buildings that were in the Art Deco design realm, such as this one that has an Egyptian feel to it. All throughout downtown New Rochelle, just look up and you see this incredible terracotta relief work, just extraordinary craftsmanship. And that was thanks to the immigrants that were still coming into New Rochelle. And here it is thriving by the 1930s. And then things would begin to change with the Depression. But before that would happen, the New Rochelle High School, the first dedicated New Rochelle High School, was constructed, as were many other schools. These three, all by the architectural firm of Starrett and Van Vleck, who also designed many department stores and clubs in Manhattan. We have Jefferson School, Isaac Young. You saw that the name, the person for which it was named, the first superintendent of schools, and Barnard School. Then came the war. So everything had come to a halt with the Depression, and things had not resumed. Everything was still pretty much on hold. When you see records of homes in the late 1930s, many are owned by banks. And then came the war. We had a major military base right off the shore of New Rochelle. It was had major military purposes, beginning with an artillery defense for New York Harbor. And then it was used as, had a Civil War hospital on it for both Union and Confederate soldiers. And it was a point of embarkation for World War I. This is a whole nother story, and I have a whole program on this as well. It's also a fascinating story. So at the end of the war, the northern part of New Rochelle, which you're seeing here, this just little bit of one part of New Rochelle. Here's Scarsdale, here's Eastchester, here's Scarsdale. So this is the farthest reach. And you see how big the lots are because they're still farms. These had all been cleared, they were still farming. Even though the development had been moving north in New Rochelle, it came to a halt because of the Depression and didn't resume until after the war. And that was a perfect time for very fast construction to accommodate all the service personnel coming home from war and wanting to buy in the suburb, to plant roots, buy a home with the GI Bill, and be part of the suburban experience. This is one example of one of those lots. It was very bucolic still and very much undeveloped until the 50s, when there was this surge. And the building led to a great surge in population. And for New Rochelle, this would be one of 3 migrations to New Rochelle. It was the Jewish families moving out of the boroughs up to the suburbs. So by the early 50s, over half the Jewish families lived in New Rochelle and in Mount Vernon. And they were sort of exemplified, and this suburban, post-World War II suburban life was exemplified by the very popular sitcom show, The Dick Van Dyke Show, which was written in this New Rochelle home by Carl Reiner, who lived here with his wife, Estelle, and their son and daughter. The son you also know, Rob Reiner. And he used this as his inspiration for The Dick Van Dyke Show. By 1960, New Rochelle had its first Jewish mayor, Mayor Alvin Ruskin, pictured here. And many of these Jewish families settled in this northern part of New Rochelle. The other big migration that would occur during this time would be the Second Great Migration, the first having occurred after World War I, where many African Americans came up from the South to the major cities seeking work. The second migration, post-World War II, was primarily to the suburbs, and that happened in Yonkers, it happened in New Rochelle, it happened in Mount Vernon. Many African Americans moved out of the boroughs and also from the South into the New York suburbs. Here we have the picture of the Ruby Dee and Ozzie Davis family there at the White House when Ozzie and Ruby got their Medal of Freedom with their children, Guy Davis, Hesna, and Nora. They came to New Rochelle in 1961. They wanted to raise their family here. They found New Rochelle to be inclusive, and they felt their children could get a good education in New Rochelle. Whitney Young, the president of the Urban League and the advisor to President Nixon and LBJ and President Nixon, bought a home here in 1961. Frederick Douglass Patterson, who founded the United Negro College Fund, settled here in 1958. There are several other civil rights activists, actors, actresses, authors, and dancers, such as Pearl Primus, who was a cultural anthropologist as well as a modern dancer with the Martha Graham Company. She brought from Africa the dances that had never been seen before in the United States and are now taught every year in Yonkers and in New Rochelle by Anthony Wooden of Bokende, who was a student of Pearl Primus. And she would come and settle in New Rochelle during this post-World War II migration. And the third migration, which was a significant migration, began here in Michoacán, located in this part of Mexico. It's a mountainous region. It borders Jalisco, and it was the home of this gentleman, Antonio Valencia. Antonio Valencia was born in 1923. He went to school to become a priest. He studied in the seminary, but was pulled out by his parents, who were very poor and in need of wages he could provide. So he went to work in Mexico City. And it was in Mexico City when he was 30 years old, where he met George and Alice Vergara of New Rochelle. They were vacationing there. They were avid travelers. They met him in church and they became very friendly, and they invited him back to become their houseman. So on October 13th, 1954, Antonio Valencia would come to New York. By the way, Mr. Vergara would become the mayor of New Rochelle just 2 years after this encounter. The Vergaras would remain dear friends of Antonio Valencia for the rest of their lives. We did this amazing documentary heritage program to, in fact, document this unique cluster migration back in the 50s from this one area of Mexico because of one man. We can trace the whole pattern of Mexican migration to New Rochelle through Antonio Valencia, including, we have documented his second flight from Mexico City to New York in 1955, as well as many other papers and documents that tell his unique story. He became, and by 1986, godfather for 2,500. My guess is when he died just a few years ago, you could add another 0 to that. He was quite lonely his first year. So he, because there was nobody else here he could speak Spanish with, he returned to Mexico and brought back with him, on that flight that you see the boarding pass for in 1955, 3 friends and relatives. And the next year, they brought friends and relatives. And the next year, they also brought friends and relatives, and so on and so forth, which is often the case, but it's never been people usually can't trace it to just one person. And he was a remarkable individual. He would find housing and clothing for them, jobs. As he says in this 1986 article, the first Mexicans I helped here arrived on October 17th, 1955. Many came from Michoacán, where crops are poor because of the climate is arid. Their lives were miserable. He says they had nothing to eat, nothing to drink. With the help of the Vergara's, he started contacting local businesses, getting them jobs, arranging for ESL classes, which are still taught here at the New Rochelle Public Library. And he was known as an apostle of the people, as well as the Godfather. He founded the El Club Cultural Hispano Mexicano, and that became a great way for the community to join in with one another and to bring and celebrate their customs. In a program of this group for a Mexican Independence Day event at the New Rochelle High School, you can see of all the names of the Mexican grocers that have already been established. Within a few decades, they have been established not only in West New Rochelle, where many, many, many of the Mexicans settled, living side by side the Italians, as still today, though gradually becoming more predominant and more predominant with other immigrants from other Central American countries as well. And now the community is spreading out of the West End and throughout New Rochelle. And you see the names on many businesses throughout the community. When my daughter graduated from New Rochelle High School in 2009, I counted 15 Valencias in her graduating class. I think by now it's more like 25 or 26. Many people are related to Antonio Valencia. He never forgot his home. He raised money not only for his community here, but for his community in Mexico. And with that money and with the help of the Vergara's, also fundraising, they were able to support and build elementary school, chapels, a health center, then a junior high school. He started an exchange program, and we have information about many of the students in that exchange program. Many went to California, some came to New Rochelle, and they're pictured here. And here's a float in a parade that I think it's the St. Patrick's Day parade in Manhattan, or it might have been the Mexican Independence Day parade. At any rate, you see the colorful costumes. He was great in introducing Americans to the vibrant, colorful traditions of the Mexican people. And those communities in Mexico, those states of Mexico, are as diverse as those in America. So there is a great diversity in the traditions as well. So now I'm going to move up quickly to today and what has happened because of this large influx of Mexicans and other Central Americans, other Spanish-speaking people coming into New Rochelle. Well, for one thing, our population is now at 80,000. We'll see soon what the 2020 census says. Last day to fill in that census form is tomorrow, and it means money for your community. I just had to put that plug in. And we think of probably 28% of the population are originally Spanish speakers, and maybe 80% of that, 28% are from Mexico. And that just shows how that community grew and grew. From 1954, no one except Mr. Valencia and maybe a few others that he didn't know, to that significant number of. And here at the New Rochelle Public Library, we have the pleasure and honor of being partners with Calpulli Mexican Dance Company. This is one of the traditions we celebrate with our Mexican community and our whole community. This is one of their annual summer performances. I was so upset not to be able to do one this year out on Library Green. They also give classes for the children, and the children also perform to great crowds out in Library Green. And we also celebrate Three Kings Day. I'm never going to do a piñata again. It was mayhem, but a lot of fun. And the very interesting looking three wise men coming to give gifts of books. We also celebrate Day of the Dead. My good friend Maria Torres, who is the owner of Lupita's Tattoos, has a group of very, very talented friends who for 10 years would create these unbelievable scenes that took over our lobby. Each year there would be a different theme. There would be a wedding one year, a market one year, a boxing match one year. This would take days to assemble, and we'd have it up for a week, and the community really enjoyed it. There'd always be an altar or an ofrenda where they would leave pictures of those who had died, as well as food they liked and drink they liked, and we would end with a celebration with tamales and sweetbreads, and it was fabulous. I'm sorry we're not seeing that this year as well. This was one of the Aztec groups that performed, and Calpulli performed for these events many times as well. So there we go. We will continue our traditions, and we are even tomorrow, there will be a special children's program that will be live streamed from our website with Flora Bromley, who is of Spanish descent. She's Spanish speaking, and we'll do a bilingual program as well. And now here, right outside the library, is Library Green, where our entire community, no matter what background, whomever your ancestors were, wherever they came from, we all come together to enjoy events in Ruby D Park, right outside the library. And our children have all kinds of events out here as well. We can't do it inside, it's outside. But we also have this wonderful theater here at our library that seats 148. So many of our programs are conducted there and in the lobby. And so when you're not busy at the Yonkers libraries, all three fabulous libraries, please come visit ours. Your Westchester library, your Yonkers library card is good at ours as well. And we're located in the heart of New Rochelle. And you can enjoy many, many restaurants with a variety of ethnicity, from Mexican to Caribbean to Peruvian to El Salvadorian to Croatian, of course Italian, great wide spectrum, all within walking distance of our library. So with that, I thank you, and I'm happy to take questions now. Let me get rid of the screen, and here we go. I see, okay. Awesome, awesome. Next year, you will throw it to make it up. I hope so. And well, thank you, everybody. If you have any questions, we can, you can get unmuted now, I think. I think it's a small enough group, we could unmute everyone.
Yeah, there actually was some questions from John.
Oh, is it down further or is it up further? The name of the castle.
See.
Oh, were there problems between the French and the Germans? Do you mean in New Rochelle?
Yeah.
No, it came that by the time the Germans came, there had been a big influx of other individuals. There was not predominantly French anymore. The Huguenots slowly assimilated. By now, I know of just one or two Huguenot descendants that are in the community. The Germans, I will say, were very, very active in the community. And for example, Germania Hall was used by the Jewish community for High Holy Days. And that didn't change until World War I, when there was such anti-German sentiment across the country. And it happened here too, but not as much, because there were so many shopkeepers, and it was really, they were very much part, as were all the other groups. I don't think that there were any problems.
When the Italians came, now they're Catholic. Was there any sort of problems there?
No, I think by then the religious, the Catholic discrimination of the persecution of the Huguenots, I think dissipated. I will tell you that we have the statue of Jacob Leisler, who was made himself a governor of New York before there was a government. And he was actually tried for treason and killed. But he was in that statue I showed. And when we've had some pushback about that statue because he's considered anti-Catholic. However, he was of Huguenot descent, and so his family was persecuted. So he didn't persecute any Germans, but he did have possibly some anti-German sentiment. So there is always, there's always those rifts between religion, but there's nothing that I've seen in newspapers or documents that lead to anything that would lead me to believe there were any great schisms.
Okay. You also mentioned that the railway stopped operating in 1938. Why was that?
It went broke. It went broke. They had spent so much money on making it beautiful, and the trains beautiful, and it's smooth riding. They lost money. They could just never bring it back. And the fact that it never went to Boston and never went to the heart of New York. So if you got on the train from let's say Waikiki neighborhood, got on the train to New York, then you have to get off that train and find other public transportation to Wall Street, and or wherever you were working. So yeah, would you take that or walk a mile or two to the New Haven rail line station and take that train?
Yeah, because I was wondering, maybe, I thought maybe because people were buying more cars then that had caused the railway.
No, I think it was just that they did not have enough foresight to see. And of course the Depression didn't help, because they could never complete it to take it to New York or Boston. But I think it was primarily that was the big reason. There are a number of very good books written about it, and there's a huge fan club of the New York, Westchester, Boston Rail. So if you go online, you can find out and see the routes. It's a fascinating story, and we travel some of those routes all the time. And the fact that we have 3 of the buildings still standing with being adaptively reused, I think is quite wonderful.
I have one last question, because actually I'm from Brooklyn, but I have a daughter first year at Dobbs Ferry Mercy College.
Okay.
So we're going to get used to, we want to become familiar with Westchester. What would you suggest to visit in New Rochelle?
Well, there's the Thomas Paine Cottage, which is the only thing that's open, to the public with limited hours. And right now it's not. But if you were to come to New Rochelle, I direct you to our waterfront. We have lots of parks, public parks on our waterfront. And you get a feel for what it was like back when there were all those steamboats coming in and the beautiful views. There are a number of great neighborhoods. I'm going to give you my email address, and you can email me, and I can send you some tours to do that I have on paper. And I also have a brochure I did of historically significant sites, and you can, I can send that to you also.
All right, I'll send you my email so that you'll know where to send it, unless
Okay, it's over in chat now.
it's in chat.
From me to everyone. It's probably the
Okay,
same.
great, thank you.
Thank you all for your very nice comments. I appreciate them. And Michael, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Barbara, did you get a chance to interview Antonio Valencia?
Oh, good question. Excellent question. We actually, in that documentary heritage program, I wasn't working in the library at the time. I was at the Hudson River Museum as curator of public programs. One of my favorite jobs. The documentary heritage project was done with the New Rochelle Public Library and with Mercy College. And the students interviewed a number of people, including Antonio Valencia. We have oral histories, and they're transcribed, and they, I believe, are online. If not now, will be very soon. We're just improving our local history section of our website. We're busily with, now that we have a full-time archivist and a local history librarian and me, busily processing all of our things, and thousands and thousands and thousands of pictures and postcards, and they're all going online. So visit our site, go to research and learning, and that will take you to local history. And I also have a number of other presentations there that I did over the summer, one on David's Island, one on the waterfront, one on the suffragists, leading suffragists of New Rochelle, and one of New Rochelle notables.
Yeah, those sound great. Yeah, I'll definitely have to follow up with you about those. Those sound really interesting. But does anyone have any questions? Yeah, if not,
For
we'll
those who
just...
want the list, just email me directly if you could, bdavis@nrpl.org, and I will I'll do a bulk mail to all the, I'll do a blast to all of you who want the tips of where to come to New Rochelle.
Yeah, you know, now I definitely want to come to New Rochelle.
Good, that's great. Yeah. Well, one thing, if you do come, next to our library, we have a walk of fame, and they're interpretive signs.
You set that up, right?
Yeah, with describing different individuals. We're actually going to have an induction in a few weeks of Pritz Pollard, who was the first African-American to coach an NFL team. You've never heard of him. He's much unknown, unfortunately. And also Mariano Rivera will join our Walk of Fame in a few weeks. And Willie Mays is there, Lou Gehrig, a whole host of people, all different, E.L. Doctorow, Mighty Mouse, a whole slew of characters and individuals. So that's a good starting point. He got off, but I'll have to tell him that's a good starting point.
Wow, well, this was so interesting, Barbara. I really appreciate your presentation.
Oh, it was absolutely my pleasure. And thank you all for joining.
Okay.
And have a good night.
Have a great night. Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming.